Hi, boys and girls. Today we're going to read a story about someone you know and have learned about. His name is George Washington Carver. So this story is called Thank You, Mr. Peanut Man. And while this is a fiction story about a family who has a farm, it tells you true things that George Washington Carver did as a wonderful scientist to help a lot of farmers and their families be more successful with their growing. So we today are going to work on using this text to help us figure out how to make the soil more nutritious. Now, we've been working on talking about how food can nourish our body and why it's important to nourish our body. But now we're going to talk about how farmers keep the soil nutritious in order to keep growing the food that we need. There are so many people in this country and in this world that farmers are so important to keep growing all the food that we need. Think about the apples or the bananas or the mangoes that your family might have in your house. Then think about all the other families there are on your block. Then think about all the families that are in our school. Then think about all the families that are in our whole city. And that's just in Baltimore. So these farmers need to know tricks to keep the soil nutritious for keeping up with all the demands of all the fresh fruit and vegetables that we need for our country and our tables. Farmers can also grow important things that help make other things. You'll hear in this story a little bit about how peanuts can help make all these different things that you don't even eat, which is really surprising. You'll hear that at the end of our story. So, by the end of our story today, I want you to be able to describe how farmers can keep the soil nutritious to keep growing all the important crops that they grow. And remember, this is a fiction story, but there is real facts in here about George Washington Carver, who taught farmers how to keep the soil more nutritious. So, thank you, Mr. Peanut Man. This is by Marya Myers and illustrated by Christopher Kerr. Thank you, Mr. Peanut Man. Here's a picture of a little boy and his dad and mom. Okay. The cotton crop is not growing, Pa tells Ma. We have no cotton to sell and cannot pay rent. What will we do? I hear a tap at the door. It's Mr. Lawson. I'm going into town to see the movable school. It may have some tips on planting, Mr. Lawson tells us. What's a movable school? I ask. Well, it's a school on wheels. A professor named Mr. Carver started this program to bring learning to farmers like us. We can't just leave the farm to study planting, Mr. Lawson explains. So here's an illustration of George Washington Carver, and you're going to hear about how they help this family fix their crops. A small crowd gathered near the truck. A man gives out a handout. How to grow the peanut, I read. Mr. Carver's handout is helpful. It tells you all the ways to use peanuts, the teacher says. Paul speaks with the teacher, and I pick up a few more handouts. As you can see, it's kind of like an old-fashioned bus maybe, or a little van that has all these important things in it. And the teacher, of course, is George Washington Carver. At dinner that evening, Paul tells us about the teacher's lesson. He said to rotate my crops, plant things other than cotton. Switching crops can add nutrients to the soil that helps plants grow. But how can I do that? Paul exclaims. All I know is cotton. How about peanuts, I ask. Here is the handout from the truck. It says peanuts enrich the soil. I read on. They are easy to plant, easy to grow, and easy to harvest. Let me see that, Paul responds. We read about peanuts for the rest of dinner. One thing that I really like that the author includes in this text is this text feature. At the top of the text feature, it says how fields of crops are rotated. Now, rotating is the important word on this page. As you can see, At the beginning of the season, we're going to plant a peanut seed. And then year 1 and year 3, it says, it'll grow. And then at the end, you harvest the plant and pick the plant out of the soil. Then in year 2 and then year 4, you're going to plant cotton seeds instead. It'll harvest cotton, and then you pick the cotton up, and then you plant peanuts the next year. So this whole first year, you're going to grow peanuts, then you're picking them out of the ground at the end of the season. And then next year, you're going to grow cotton, and it will help the soil stay nutritious. Then after the cotton, you'll switch back to peanuts, and it'll rotate then to cotton. And then you'll rotate back to peanuts, and then you'll rotate to cotton. It's a trick that George Washington Carver discovered while studying plants. Very, very interesting. The bottom here, there's a star, another text feature that says, nitrogen is a nutrient that helps plants survive. Rotating crops adds nitrogen back into the soil. So the really important vocab word here is rotate. That's the trick of how to keep the soil nutritious. A few weeks later, the truck returns. Paul asks about growing peanuts. Peanuts are good for the soil, but will people buy them? Peanuts are a cash crop, the teacher tells us. Mr. Carver told us people will buy peanuts because you can use them in more than 150 ways. They are not just for eating. You can make laundry soap, shampoo, paint, and even glue. What? All using peanuts? This is what the peanut plant looks like. Now, maybe when you've eaten peanuts before, you've had to open up the shell and it kind of makes a big mess. Maybe if you're watching a baseball game or having a party outside, people like to crack peanut shells open and then toss them on the ground. But inside the shell is the thing that you eat. It kind of looks like a bean almost because you take the shell off and eat what's inside. But this is what the plant looks like above the ground. These are the roots below the ground. So imagine the soil is about here. And the peanuts will grow under the ground with the roots, and then this is what grows above the ground. Oops. Wow, I love this illustration. This shows us the difference of what it looks like to have peanuts growing and what it looks like to have cotton growing. For the next 3 years, we switch our crops each year. We plant peanuts one year and cotton the next. With more nutrients in the soil, the crops get stronger. I keep reading Mr. Carver's handouts on farming. Pa, I want to study with Mr. Carver at the Tuskegee Institute. I can bring what I learned back to the farm, I tell them. Pa agrees. On my first day of school, I can find Mr. Carver inside the classroom. He is standing behind glass tubes and beakers. May I help you? He asks. I have come to study with you, Mr. Carver. Your peanuts helped us keep our farm, I tell him. You're just in time, Mr. Carver responds. Have you ever seen a sweet potato? Let's see what we can make with that. The thing I love the most about these books is it kind of gives you extra information. So I'm just going to read it to give you some extra information on George Washington Carver in the Tuskegee Institute where he taught at. But also, remember that question is, how did the farmers keep the soil nutritious? Keep that in your brain and think back to our text. George Washington Carver was born enslaved in 1864. Just before slavery ended, he later moved to the Midwest, where he went to college and learned about plants and farming. After earning a master's degree in 1896, he took a job at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. He studied which crop grew best in the local soil. He learned to keep the soil healthy by rotating crops or switching the plants grown from year to year. Carver wanted to share his knowledge with farmers, but he knew that he could not leave their work to the task to take classes. In 1906, he started a movable school. A horse pulled a wagon that served as a college on wheels. It was just called the Jessup wagon after a man who was first paid for the project. Teachers on the wagon taught about farming, health, and helpful new products. In time, a truck replaced the wagon. The program ended in 1944 when each county in the state set up an office to provide such information. And here is a beautiful photograph. It's really cool. Of course, it's black and white because it's real from that time. And it says, the Booker T. Washington Agricultural School on Wheels. Now, I want to remind you, you might be thinking, why did the farmers need to have this truck teach them these things? Why couldn't they just Google it? Well, there wasn't Google back then. This was so long ago that they still had wagons being pulled by animals as their main form of transportation. So before you had everything on your phone or on your tablet that you could look up, you had to use information by wonderful people and leaders who were studying these interesting things. Now, another important thing to note is that at this time, slavery had just officially ended in America. So a lot of people of color and Black people, they weren't getting a lot of information and they weren't really allowed to go to school still. So it was really, really important that George Washington Carver was educating all of these farmers who were no longer slaves and they had their own farms or starting to grow their own crops. And he was helping them become stronger and have more knowledge. So George Washington Carver was really, really an important leader, and I love him. So how did he help the farmers keep their soil more nutritious? That's an important question, and you're going to write about it. Just to give you one more hint, the word rotate is very important. Oops. And this is the part of the text that helps us understand how to keep your soil nutritious. So have a wonderful rest of your day, friends, and thanks for working so hard and learning about these important crops. Bye.